You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
All right, hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions, the podcast where goths talk about goth with a different guest each month. Here's what we have on the slab for today's episode. We are going to be giving our postmortem of the year that was in goth. We are going to also be discussing where we stand on the question of defining goth, as well as talk about some of the major contentions and schools of thought around that issue. We'll review the new album from Ghostland, give our Sinister Suggestions for other gothy stuff that's worth your time. As always, if you want to skip ahead to a specific topic we're covering on the episode, just take a look at the show notes. There's timestamps there. Usually you can click on them and it'll jump you forward to that discussion. So, as always, I am the Count, and I'm here with my co-host Trey. Hello, Trey.
Hello, Count. Hello, listeners. How are we all doing today?
And our special guest to start off 2019 is, well, you know who she is. All hail to our goth queen, Michelle. Welcome back.
Hello. Thank you for having me back.
We are but peons in the presence of true royalty. So let's do a quick wrap up of the year. I don't want to, drag this out or anything, but I think 2018 was a pretty interesting time for goth. I don't know. What are your highlights, I guess? Some albums that you got really into, or any cultural things or events you went to, or notable scene stuff?
I don't have anything major. I had a couple of small highlights. I did get to Cold Waves in Chicago this year, which was a lot of fun. That was my first time getting out to one of those events. And really, I'm not big on most music festivals, so I haven't been to a lot of them. Really, I've been to maybe a handful of convergences, but that's about it. But Cold Waves was a good time. It's not the same as a convergence, because most of the joy in convergence, for me at least, when I've gone, is going to visit a new city and seeing a whole new scene, where Cold Waves, for me, since it's in Chicago, was just the same old people for the most part, but going to see a concert with lots of cool bands and, listen to some out of town DJs and have fun dancing for a night. So that was a really good time. So beyond that, just a little bit of travel, I guess. So I got to experience a couple other scenes in very, very small amounts. But beginning of the year, I went out to Austin and went to one of their nights. Of course, I didn't know anybody there, and still a relatively small scene. So I didn't really have get a good feel for the culture, but I enjoyed the club night and basically owned the dance floor the whole night. It was a midweek one, which is another part of why it was probably so small. And they just had at that same club their, I think, Vampire Masquerade ball the previous weekend. So there really weren't that many people out there. Most of the people that were there were just hanging around by the bar. So, I had the dance floor to myself, and the DJ started playing things that made me get up and dance and seemed like they were kind of reading my taste. So that was always fun. And then the bigger highlight was just about a month ago when I was out in Florida visiting family. I did take a night out, head down to Tampa, and went to the castle, which, of course, I've heard all kinds of great things about. And I also know a couple of people who are there. So I was able to meet a few people, saw a little bit of insight into a pretty vibrant scene. So that was exciting.
I won't give any details, but there's a chance that at the end of this year, I may be at the castle in Florida. So that would be wonderful to get out there.
Yeah, definitely keep me in the loop. I may make my own way out there at the same time if you end up going.
What about you, Michelle?
Well, I have to say New York City this year really stepped up their museum game. We had a lot of really cool exhibits here. We had the exhibit at the Met, the Met and the Cloisters, which was the Heavenly Bodies exhibit, Fashion and the Catholic Imagination, which was absolutely incredible. So they had a lot of, couture clothing interspersed in both museums, and the Cloisters, if anybody out there doesn't know, the Cloisters is actually a replica of a medieval garden. So everything really looked very at home there. So that was really cool to see.
That sounds
And
amazing.
even the part at the Met, it was all interspersed in the like Renaissance paintings galleries. So that was super cool. And I actually just went to the Morgan Library and saw the 200th anniversary of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And that was amazing. They had a lock of her hair, which was
wow,
absolutely incredible to see.
Yeah.
And they had a first edition of Frankenstein that she had annotated and made notes in for the second edition.
Oh my god.
Absolutely incredible.
You managed to somehow take that home with you, right?
The glass, like we were looking at it, the glass was like half an inch thick, like all the way around. We're like, yeah, I think they, but definitely the highlight for museums for me was the Brooklyn Museum had a David Bowie retrospective.
Yeah.
So that was, I mean, to say ugly crying doesn't even begin to describe what I was doing. It was more like full body racking sobs, so much that a stranger actually like patted me on the shoulder. He's like, "Oh, I know, I miss him too." And he hugged me, which is normally something I would not do. Yeah. But it was a very, very emotional, very emotional. Absolutely. And my eyeliner did not stand the test, let me tell you. I looked ghastly when I left that place, but it was incredible.
No, you looked correct after you left that place.
Yeah. So then I went and I drowned my sorrows in Mexican food afterwards. But yeah, that was incredible. And then I was also in Philadelphia and I saw an exhibit on Victorian hair art. You know, and they would take the hair of their dead relatives and fashion it into art, like wreaths and stuff like that. So that was absolutely incredible. And that was funny because a lot of that stuff was from the private collection of a woman who owns an antique shop here in New York that I know. So it was like I went to Philly to see her stuff, but you know, And there was some good music. We got a new Lycia album. So that was a great record. And
how'd you feel about the new records. Alien Sex Fiend?
I didn't listen to it.
Okay.
Honestly, I did not listen to it. Alien Sex Fiend remains to this day the only concert I've ever walked out on.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
When was that?
Maybe 98.
Huh.
Was it a particularly bad concert, or do you just not like Alien Sex Fiend and you didn't know at the time?
I wouldn't listen to them all day, but I like them. And I was jazzed about seeing them, but the crowd and the music that they were playing was very like rave.
What?
Yeah. It was weird. It was really weird.
That doesn't really surprise me that much, since they've always veered towards the club style, not quite rave style, of course, but I mean, being Batcave style. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that they're engaging with somewhat of a rave culture.
Yeah, there weren't, and we were kind of like, did everybody know this before? Because there were very few goths in the audience, like very, very few.
You know, that was what it was like, weirdly enough, not this recent Bauhaus tour, but the one a few years before that when I saw them at, the House of Blues. There were a surprisingly few number of goths there as well.
Yep, see, that wouldn't surprise me because they've been around for so long. They could legitimately have fans in their 50s and 60s, so I don't know, like, I give you a little bit, like, maybe you just don't look it anymore. Maybe it was just like a nostalgia thing for you.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Peter Murphy, like, solo, he was kind of big on college radio, too, so...
I mean, Alien Sex Fiend isn't that much younger than Bauhaus, maybe 3-4 years.
Yeah, that's true.
So there are plenty of
this
elders
was like,
there too.
This was like glow sticks and weird like day glow trip pants. Weird.
Well, I mean, that's not too
And then,
dissimilar
like,
from what's considered cyber now, which is quote unquote acceptable at goth clubs.
Was there a
So-
banana at least?
There was, yeah. We did
Okay,
get
good.
to see the inflatable banana. So no, I have not heard the new Alien Sex Fiend. Should I? I don't know. You tell me.
It's worth listening through it once, I think.
Okay.
I'd say if you're a fan of Alien Sex Fiend, which it sounds like you are, it's an Alien Sex Fiend album. It's not a big change. It's not a big change in form. It's pretty standard Alien Sex Fiend. They didn't go rave on the album or anything like that. I enjoyed it. It was fine. Alien Sex Fiend's always been hit or miss with me. I really love a handful of their songs, but their shtick gets kind of old for me.
Jason said when he went to see Pop Tones, it was mostly people in that age range and only a couple of other goths.
Yeah.
Actually, I did see.
Actually, doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I saw Pop Tones as well, and it mostly felt like it was an older crowd, people who were probably fans of the various bands that now make up Pop Tones back in the 80s. And there were actually a fair number of goths there, or at least a fair number of people that I see regularly at clubs. But it was a mix of people that would be at any sort of an 80s music concert.
Yeah, like more the crowd you get when you go to see like Echo or the Furs or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I had a couple highlights. The Cure was inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Oh, that's
that was
right.
pretty neat. A couple of like just our podcast related things. We added a couple shows to the Belfry Network that I think are really, really good. Those being Rose Sinister, which is a sort of academic, in-depth take on vampire literature and pop culture.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying that. That's really good.
Yeah, she's great. She's great. And then the other would be Cat versus Bat, which is a podcast with a couple DJs from Canada, America's Hat. That's offensive. Is that offensive? I don't know.
I don't know.
But
I don't know. Maybe.
They kind of talk about their experiences within the scene. There's one episode about someone being peed on, which was really good. But
okay, I must miss that one.
there's a lot of personal anecdotes and talk about recent music, and it's a really good all around sort of scene podcast. So I'm really impressed with those shows, and it was really cool that they were able to and interested in joining the Belfry. So Peter Murphy threw some beer bottles at some of his fans, so that was fun.
Wait, I thought he didn't do that.
So
I'm so confused.
I don't know. I read the post-punk thing, and it's a big. It's kind of like the same. It was kind of the same with what happened with the sandwich eating security guard incident, where there was everybody was telling a different story. And there were people who were like just wanted to shit on Peter Murphy, and then there were people who just wanted to defend him as like some paragon. So it's if you weren't there, it's who knows. But that was a fun little diversion.
That was What do you think of his beard?
I love the beard. I'm
me
pro
too.
Beard. Yeah.
And I'm usually not pro beard, but I like it.
I brought that up. I do a yearly goth meetup at the Renaissance Fair, and I brought that up in when we were hanging out with a bunch of people, and most people were like, "No, I'm not into it." And I was like, "What is?"
Yeah, but I mean, I also like Nick Cave's mustache, so maybe I just have bad taste.
I agree.
See, I
just like Nick Cave. I don't know.
I'm good with Peter Murphy's beard. I don't really have a strong opinion of it either way. I do not like Nick Cave's mustache, though. I am not a fan. But you know what? It's his face. It's his mustache. He can do what he wants. I'm not going to deny him that, but not a fan.
If I were ever to take a mustache ride, that would be it. And then I just wanted to mention, like, there was so much good music that came out this year. Oh my God. Just brand new bands, existing bands from the, Alien Sex Fiend came out with a new, she passed away. I know they're not that old, but, who was it? Snowdrop, some 80s band just released a new, what the hell is it? A Handful of Snowdrops.
Handful of Snowdrops, right.
But some of the
and 1919 has a new track out. I have not heard it yet, but yeah, I think they're actually playing in New York.
There's rumors about Light Asylum coming back. All kinds of crazy shit was happening. I had a couple. I just earlier today, I just wrote down a couple albums or a couple bands that, off the top of my head, I've been listening to a lot recently. So Nox Novacula, which we reviewed on a previous episode. Unity One, which is a synth pop band that I got into maybe 7 years ago. They just came out with the LP and it's really, really good. CeeLo Fan continues to be amazing and weird and just goofy, or not goofy, but
they're
just
great.
Obtuse in all the right ways. Bastet, which they just released a EP, and it's a all women witchy post-punk band, which I thought has a lot of promise. Vogue Noir, Diaval Strain, they've got a really good album out. Traders, Them Are Us Too had a really, really good ethereal album that came out. And so that's what I've been listening to recently. And even just early 2019, we've got Haunt is coming out with a new album. Polyverso is coming out with a new album. She Passed Away just released theirs. So it's there's been so much good music for so long that I almost don't remember when there was no good goth music and everybody was complaining about it.
But you don't miss it, I bet.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Definitely don't miss that.
All right, well, with that, let's go ahead and jump into the news.
If this boy did this and the Gothic, stuff that went around it and the motive and everything, don't we all sort of want to know, that could be our teenager, that could be our kid doing that. How could that possibly happen?
Being described as being involved with the goth movement, but what exactly is that? We kind of know it when we see it, but some aspects of a goth lifestyle could they provoke such a murder?
So here's what you've been waiting for. Recently, I've been seeing a renewed interest on the question of how we define goth floating around in different parts of the internet, like Facebook, Reddit, all kinds of places, Discord. I don't know why it's been popping up again, but it has. And I've actually seen some specific critiques of how I define goth. Most of those come from the Alt Cows message board. But generally they're along the lines of too much philosophy and not enough music. So it's been a while since we've dedicated a show or even directly addressed the question of what is goth? How do we quantify it? And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that I don't want this podcast to be the What is Goth show, because I think a lot of people find that question to be cliche and tiresome to rehash all the time. And it makes for a boring podcast if you're just talking about the same thing every week. And the second reason is because I put together a comprehensive series of videos on our YouTube page, which went through my views on that issue. But, not everybody's going to watch those. And I did specifically aim those towards an academic level of analyzation and understanding. So I thought that going into 2019, trying to sort of level set for where we stand on this issue and then address some of the more contentious elements of that question would be a good idea. And then in the future, when this comes up, I can just kind of point people back to this episode rather than rehashing it. Longtime listeners know that we do have an episode from a few years ago addressing the issue, but at this point it's pretty outdated. I've changed some of my views. The show has changed overall. So I think doing a revisit on this would be a good idea. So the way we're going to do this, I want to frame the conversation by referencing a post from Jillian Venters, who cites a couple letters she received from readers. And I think these do a pretty good job of giving a general idea of the similar questions I've been seeing in different formats. So let's start by addressing those letters first, and then I'd like to go into us talking about our definitions of goth, working that out, kind of responding to some of the comments from Jillian on that post, and then go over some of the more debated aspects of the question. So let's just start by reading this from Wraith, the first letter. They say, "Salutations, Lady of the Manors. In a recent post, you discussed the unending debate of what is goth, as well as the issues with gatekeeping and elitism that sadly exist within the community, and in just about every community on Earth in my experience. I appreciated reading your opinions as well as those in the comments. Now my question dilemma is this. Should I use the term goth or gothic to describe myself? Labels in general aren't hugely important to me, but when people ask, and they always do, are you goth, what should my answer be? I'm well versed in the history and inspirations of the goth subculture. I know the bands and influences that helped shape gothdom into what it is today, and I can certainly appreciate that. However, I'm just not very interested in old school gothic rock. Having spent a lot of time listening to every classic goth band I could track down, I can honestly say that it's not my cup of tea. There are songs here and there that I like, but the genre in general just isn't for me. I'm somewhat of a quiet introvert, so the clubbing scene isn't my thing either. I do love many newer goth and goth-influenced artists like Hannah Fury, Emily Autumn, etc., but my primary musical tastes are in classical and opera. On the other hand, my tastes are textbook goth. I find beauty in the darkness, eerie and macabre. I adore gothic novels and poetry. I love to go for midnight strolls under the full moon with my black velvet skirts swishing around me as I walk. My closet is stuffed to bursting with Victorian vampire and romantic-goth fashion and has been for over a decade. These are just a sampling of my decidedly gothic inclinations. So in your opinion, what would it be most appropriate for me to term myself, goth or gothic?
So I guess my general thought on it would be to Wraith, what makes you most comfortable? Would you like to be called goth or gothic? I don't particularly have a problem with either as far as how they want to term themselves. The comment about I just can't get into gothic rock, that's fine. Gothic rock isn't the only aspect of gothic music. Admittedly, just pure classical isn't usually considered under the gothic umbrella, but there's plenty of heavily classically influenced and folk influenced goth bands that are part of that umbrella that would be considered engaging with the music. The only question I guess I would have is, do they have an interest in engaging with goth as a culture? And that doesn't mean necessarily going out to clubs. They mentioned they weren't doing that. They're obviously engaging here with Jillian, so they're engaging to some degree with the community. And, if they want to have this back and forth, if they want to have this engagement with the community, I think that's perfectly legitimate reason to call yourself goth. If you are not interested in the community and you just want to do your own thing, dress in black, listen to whatever music you want, but have no interest in the overall culture scene, then I'd say you're more gothic, or you can term yourself gothic if you have to even use any term at all.
Well, I know what Jillian told this person.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
She's way she's way nicer than I am.
Be mean. Be yourself.
I would say you're saying that myself is mean. It is a little. It's fine. I would say no. I would say that no, you're not a goth. Because I always think that being a goth is a perfect storm of likes, interests, but it does center on goth music. And yeah, maybe you don't like goth rock. Maybe the sisters aren't your cup of tea. I don't get that because they're awesome, but okay. But I get how it can sound. I don't know the age of this person, but I can get how maybe like goth rock can sound a little dated.
Yeah.
Depending on your age, depending on what kind of music you grew up around. But I don't think that if you're just listening to classical music and opera, even if it's the darker side of classical music or opera, I don't know. I don't think it makes you a goth. Not that I wouldn't, want to talk to this person. Not that I wouldn't I don't think, you deserve like an Amish style shunning, but there's nothing wrong with not being a goth, though, on the other side of that.
And so I guess to Trey's point, I do think there is something there because she is engaging, she is interested in looking. So the way I would handle this if Wraith is listening would be to gather, what music do you like? So just going off of the couple that she mentioned, this is sort of the progression that I would suggest. I would start with like Dyna Lakayan, Estampi, Helium Vola, Quintal. It's kind of within that. And then that can lead...
Yeah. Ordo Equium Solus.
Yep. And I think that can lead to something like Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Monica Richards, Faith in the Muse, Switchblade Symphony.
Yeah, Faith in the Muse, Requiem in White.
Collide, if you want a little more industrial in there. Drab Majesty, Cold Cave, Soft Kill. And so...
Dead Can Dance.
Yeah. And
that's
and so there are... And maybe that's part of the problem is this, obviously there is a veneration of the 80s bands for their, what they did for the scene. But the spirit of that lives on in newer music, which may be more accessible, which can lead you to enjoying the older stuff. And I think that's part of being a baby bat. Again, I don't know the person's age, not that necessarily matters. But my personal view is that if a person is demonstrating, if you have an active interest in seeking out more music that is considered goth to try and find something that you connect with, I do think that will come with time. 80s goth rock doesn't really hit for everyone right away. It didn't for me. But it can be developed. It can be a developed taste through that kind of process over time of getting into stuff you're into and branching your appreciation for different sounds and styles over time. And I think that's what the baby bat phase is for, why that label is there. It's this development process you go through to kind of discover what you do and don't like and kind of sit with the culture for a while and learn and grow and get involved and do some introspection. And if you come out of that feeling like it's just not for you eventually, then fine. But I think you could take on that mantle of baby bat as long as you are actively seeking. If you were at a point where you're like, well, I've looked up everything I could figure out, so I'm done with it. If that's your attitude, then I don't think you could call yourself goth. But
it also, I don't know, it makes me always feel kind of curious how people try to push themselves so much to becoming a goth, quote unquote. To me, it should be somewhat organic. You like this thing, you find the next thing. You like this band, well, who did they influence? Who's influenced by them? And it shouldn't be oh, I don't like that. I'm going to move on. Oh, I don't like that either. Oh, I don't like that either.
Yeah, it's always been a source of confusion.
Maybe that's just the way it happened for me.
It's been a source of confusion for me, too. There seems to be, I don't know, maybe in certain circles of the internet or YouTube or Instagram or something, there's a cachet to being considered goth for some reason. And there are plenty of people who seem to have little to no interest in a lot of parts of what would be considered traditional goth culture, yet still want to be a goth. And so instead of finding out what you like and then labeling yourself based on, what most closely associates with what you like, people seem to be flipping that around and finding a label that they want and then deciding that those things that they like are the only things that are important to really be given that label, and the other stuff is unimportant. And it's always just been very confusing to me why there's this desire to be a goth when you're not that interested.
Because we're pretty, Trey.
There are lots of pretty people out there, though, and I don't necessarily want to be any of those other groups. I certainly do appreciate the aesthetic, and I can understand the Instagram goth thing, and being attracted to that aesthetic. But I don't know. I've always seen, being a part of a culture or subculture to be a way of deepening your understanding of yourself. So you find what you already like, and then you find the community built around those things you like, and then that helps you meet people with similar interests, helps you discover new things that you might like because they're similar to other things. And it seems if you go with the reverse, you're just putting yourself in a community of people you don't like or you might not like.
Right.
And I just
or you might not
I just
like.
don't get that. I don't understand why that reverse is happening these days. And then also to go on the
Yeah, and you're wasting your own like precious time. Like you could be you could be listening
Yeah,
to
you're
something
living
you
with
really
constant
love, but
tension.
instead you're plodding through like everything 4AD ever put out trying to find something you like.
Right. And then the second thing, and this is something that we've seen a lot, we've had plenty of news articles or common things on this show and elsewhere that have talked about how, well, I like all the goth things, but I just can't get into the music because I don't like goth rock. And there seems to be this conception. I don't know if it's from the outside or if it's just based on what insiders recommend when a new person comes in, but there's a conception that goth is this very narrow genre that equals 80s goth rock or death rock, when it's a much broader thing. And most of the comments
Right.
we see in response to
Yeah.
these things are
Yeah.
that, well, what
Yeah.
have you tried? I mean, did you just try the big goth 3 and didn't like any of them, or have you branched out? But I think part of the problem is us as insiders, when someone new is coming in, if they say, oh, you want to get into this? Well, here's some bands you need to listen to. And we just list Bauhaus, Sisters, Joy Division, The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, whatever, you know, the top 5, top 10 most recognizable goth bands. I think that's doing people a disservice, especially given, as you know, Daniel regaled us about for his highlights of the year, we've had a huge influx of really good modern goth music and starting new
Modern
people in
and varying
Exactly.
genres.
But starting new people in who have already grown up in a modern idiom with more modern music, stuff that still has the sonic template of what they're used to when it comes to music and isn't this weird outreach from, you know, a time that's not theirs. That's a better way of getting people into it. And then, you know, maybe, I mean, anybody like myself, when I started getting into music, I voraciously look up, oh, I like this band. Who did they get their inspiration from? Who do they name check? And I go back and back and back. And then I also tend to go forward too, though I do tend to look backwards. I discover new bands, then look back to see what older bands led to that. So that's kind of how my discovery process has always worked. Any further comments on Wraith, or we want to move on?
No,
that was all I had to say about that one.
But I'm if Wraith is listening, I hope you weren't upset by what I said, and I will gladly make you a mixtape of something that maybe you would like. You know,
that's the thing. I think that's the best thing for people that are new is to reach out to a friend. And I try to do this for the newer people that I know. Reach out to someone that you know that's friendly, that has more experience, that can take, okay, this is what you like, try this, and this out. And I try to really do that for people because it's easy for older goths to feel like I'm answering this question again. I don't want to go through, but people who have been in it for a while, you need to remember that everybody wants to start somewhere. And if you're snubbing someone or you're just kind of brushing them off because you don't want to deal with it, you're losing a potential member of the subculture that could be contributing.
And then, you know, you can't be like the bitchy older person who says, well, you have the internet now. I didn't have the internet. You go and, which I'm a little bit bitter maybe that it was much harder for me and that I bought a lot of really crappy records because I didn't know any better. Whereas now you can hear everything before you plunk your money down for it. But at the same time, we're always complaining. Like, us older people are always complaining. Like, well, you're getting all your information off the internet, and how do you know it's right? You know, I'm sure that there are pages out there that tell you that Marilyn Manson is the pinnacle of goth. So if you're reading that, you're definitely wrong, and I'm not going to apologize for anybody for saying that. But we can't.
I think Joe just woke up from a deep slumber and shouted into the void.
I feel like Joe shouts into the void a lot. I just like a guess. I don't know.
So this is a second letter here on the article from Morwenna. Gracious headmistress, I have a rather unique problem that I hope you would be able to solve if at all possible. I consider myself a goth, as I have done for several years now, But while I appreciate the subculture's roots in music, I don't particularly enjoy the typical goth music as much as some people would like me to. That's not exactly the problem, however. I do love Gothic literature with a passion. In fact, I'm building my career in writing retellings or sequels of some older Gothic novels. Still, I know many Goths enjoy vampire fiction, especially classics like Dracula. While I have read Dracula and other classic vampire novels, I particularly enjoy Carmilla, I have always found myself enjoying Gothic novels that Goths don't commonly speak of, with my favorites being Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I suppose I like mad scientists and all the corresponding tropes quite a lot. I have, unfortunately, encountered several people that think my favorite pieces of Gothic fiction don't count as Gothic, especially the latter. I do find that notion a bit silly, but it got me thinking. Does Goth have to follow certain patterns, for lack of a better word? Is it possible to be Goth in a different way than is common for most people and still be able to claim that label? I know there should be certain requirements to be considered Goths, but how far can boundaries be pushed? Yours truly, Morwenna.
Who the fuck told you that Frankenstein wasn't goth or a gothic novel? That's what I want to know.
I will go with both Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They're both clearly
Gothic.
and
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They're both clear. I mean, literally, what did I say in the beginning of the episode? I literally went to in an exhibit, and I know that I do like to, just because I think it pisses off nerd boys. I do like to say, oh, by the way, a teenage girl invented science fiction, being Mary Shelley, but that's clearly a Gothic novel. I mean, the word Gothic was sprawled all over that exhibit.
Even if you need to obsessively go with, well, Goth has to be about death, and that's vampires okay, but this wasn't, but it was still resurrecting corpses, so there's still that aspect there, and it's really not even that limited, so that's a ridiculous argument. But even still, corpses.
Yeah, and Gothic literature is a lot about the atmosphere and the tension in the atmosphere, and nothing is more atmospheric than Frankenstein.
Gothic literature in general is all about passions. It's not necessarily about life or death. It's about passions and to some degree, abandonment of reason.
No, and it's not just about sexy vampires or really sad counts or dukes. I mean, it can be, and that's great, but Morwenna, I want to know who told you that, and I want to hex them or something. I don't know. That was terrible. Whoever told you that, don't be friends with them anymore. Maybe the internet told you that. Ask them if they like neuromancy.
Maybe you want to find all those people, dismember them, and put them back together into a proper goth and raise them from the dead.
Maybe. I like it.
And that last bit there about is it possible to be goth in a different way than is common for most people and still claim the label? I do think there is, there has to be within a living, breathing community some form of some way to add personal expression. And, importantly, and I guess this still doesn't get said enough, you can enjoy stuff that's not goth, that is important to you, without trying to force it into a goth label.
Right.
But that said, obviously, if you go from decade to decade to decade, what is considered within the goth bubble changes and evolves all the time. And it's part of that, that conversation. And the boundaries do change slowly and through this arduous process of people yelling at each other a lot of times.
Not as slowly as some old school goths might like it to.
Sure, yeah. Sure. But even the original canon of goth music is debated and changed and that kind of thing. So it does happen, but you're not going to show up in... that's why pastel goth isn't a thing anymore, because it's just, you can't go that extreme with it. But that, the existence of pastel goth itself down the road very likely has had some impact on what it works within the culture. So, all right. So let's...
and hello, the Damned have a song called Dr. Jekyll.
Yeah, I almost mentioned that as well.
So, Yeah.
That's actually one of my favorite Damn songs too.
Yeah, I really don't think I could maybe able to get past this person who said that those aren't Gothic novels.
No, I mean, you can tell them literally any Gothic literature academic will disagree with them.
Yeah, we'll disagree.
I could think of many other novels that are considered Gothic novels that would be a little bit more maybe nebulous, that are, you know, traditional, would be your Jane Austens, your Pride and Prejudices, things like that. They still
that's
fit,
not.
But
I mean, like Northanger Abbey makes fun of Gothic novels and it satirizes Gothic novels, but it's not a Gothic novel in and of itself.
Here's a good comment from the chat room. Hey Shaker says, personally, I indulge in the parts of the culture that I like. I don't think it's enough that I can wear the label, so I don't. The thing is, no one seems to care.
No, and nobody cares in real life. People only care on the internet.
Well, I think people care less about, oh, you say you're goth and you like these other things, as long as you're not trying to claim those other things are also goth. It's when you both claim to be a goth and then claim a bunch of things that you like that are not traditionally considered goth, but insist that because you're a goth, they are goth. That's where the contention is.
Right, that because you like it, it's goth. Like knitting is goth and Harry Potter is goth, and like, no, I don't know.
Although all goths should be Ravenclaw, and anyone who says they're Slytherin is wrong. So
that's right. Heads up. Ravenclaw goths for the win.
I'm a Hufflepuff.
Oh, okay.
I don't like their color scheme. I definitely prefer the Ravenclaw color scheme, but I'll go with their attitudes.
Yeah. Yeah, I like their live and let live kind of attitude.
As ungoth as my given house is, according to Pottermore, my given Patronus is the most goth Patronus ever. The Thestral.
Spider?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
So I guess that makes up for my Hufflepuff.
I was about to say you were about to have the shortest co-host run in the history of Cemetery Confessions, but you pulled it out there.
Respect the Hufflepuff.
All right, so let's get into how we sort of define goth and if we agree on it, because I actually made a fairly significant change to my kind of 4-point definition of goth. Importantly, though, I think that the reason this remains a topic of discussion, not just because new people are getting into it, but because this sort of ongoing self-reflective dialogue seems to be part of what goth itself has been built on. The question of, is it a music subculture or is it a lifestyle, has been around forever, and what do you even mean when you say lifestyle? That's important to break apart. What does the conception of a goth mindset mean? What does that entail? If goth is an identity, how do we differentiate individual from group identity? Or if goth is only ever about music, then why did Bauhaus dress so fancy? So let's start with a general framework. Well, let's start with Jillian's framework, and then set out kind of what we conceive as a workable model for understanding goth. So here's a very short quote from what Jillian said. She said, "Are you interested in darker art, literature, music, or fashion? Do you see beauty in things that others may consider morbid or disgusting?
Disturbing.
Then you are in some way disturbing. Then you are in some way goth."
I would substitute the word "or" for "and."
Yes.
See, I think you have to have all of that.
That's fair.
I mean, I don't know. If I told you that I know a woman who dyes her hair black, she watches True Blood and the originals, and she loves Anne Rice books and ghost books, and would you say that person's goth?
That'd be a maybe.
By that definition,
No.
by that definition, by Jillian's definition, you would say yes. But that person is my mother, and she's not. She just has slightly, odd taste in her
Yeah.
TV shows and reading, but
Yeah.
she's definitely not, but
I totally agree. And
so I think you have to have, I think the word is and. And I understand where Jillian is coming from, and I understand that she wants to be super inclusive. I'm just,
but she's wrong. So that's
but she's wrong. Yeah, I just think it has to be and. Again, like the theory of the perfect storm, that everything hits you all at once, and then you find out, oh, this has a name. This is a thing that exists. I don't have to mold myself to it. It's already out there, and I can just be that.
And I think it goes the other way too, though, and this is where people get a little more pissy about it, is that if you only like goth music, that doesn't mean you're goth. I had a previous boss who was really into Susie and the Banshees and Bauhaus, like really, really into them, and knew absolutely nothing else about anything you would consider goth. And he was just like a, normal corporate kind of guy. I don't think you could consider him goth. I think the confusion a little bit is when people are trying to do this purist sort of music centered thing, which it is music centered. What they're missing is that implicit in the music is a bunch of other stuff that goes along with that. So here's my 4-point definition of goth, and you guys can tell me what you think, or we can just move on. The first is an appreciation of goth music. The second is aesthetic deviance that aligns with the sartorial idioms of goth. So basically some degree of, oddity, goth fashion kind of thing.
So basically being weird, but in a goth way.
Yeah. Aesthetically, though, like physically, sartorially.
I got it, yeah.
Semiotically, yeah. The third is embracing darkness, which the reason I kept that phrase is just because since the 90s, anytime you ask somebody what goth is, that phrase always comes up, so I like it. I like that it's, what it means, but it's ambiguous enough to be able to have different meaning for different people. So for me, that can manifest as sort of an appreciation of the macabre, an appreciation of Gothic literature, finding beauty in the uncanny and abnormal, that kind of thing. That's that part of it. And then the fourth is an active pursuit of incorporating these ideologies, material objects, and rituals into substantive communal interactions. So it's sort of a lifestyle curation.
I'm glad that last one was added in there and was a little bit more refined, because one of my, I guess, consistent complaints with a lot of the definitions is they're very solitary. They're all, you must like these things. They're very materialistic, and don't have any part of the engagement with the community. And I think that is a absolute requirement. If you do not participate in any way, shape, or form within the community, you can't really be considered a part of a community. You could be considered someone who enjoys things that are goth, like an ethnomusicologist would enjoy music from another culture but aren't that culture. But in order to be a member of a culture, you have to be engaged with the culture to some degree. That doesn't mean you have to go out to clubs. That doesn't mean you have to write books on the subject or define things, but there has to be some engagement, some sort of back and forth between you and other members in the culture to be, I guess, a part of any culture.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm in agreement with Trey. And I think I think the internet puts a lot of pressure on people, and I'm not in this instance. I'm not just talking about young people. I'm talking about all people, and some of it is subconscious. But you shouldn't have to get up in the morning and say, "What can I do today that's goth?" It should be a more natural and a more organic experience.
Yeah, I agree. There's a,
and I think that's where your lifestyle curation comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Like when this is the thing you do, if every weekend you're going out digging in a record shop, going to like antique stores, or you're going to museums to look at art, or you're going to used bookstores. Anybody can do that, but what you're bringing home, what you're bringing into your life from these places is your lifestyle curation. And if you're buying something just because you think it's going to make you gother, then why are you buying it? Does anybody watch that tidying up show on Netflix
Yes.
with that lady?
No,
Marie
not yet.
Like, does it spark joy?
I was waiting for that.
And if it doesn't, if it doesn't genuinely, then like I'm saying, like you're wasting your time listening to music you don't like, and you're wasting your time reading books you don't like, and putting stuff in your home you don't like. I think when you let it happen organically, you feel more fulfilled. Maybe you don't have as many goth points as everybody else. Very few people live in an all-black apartment, let's face it.
Yeah, I think there's an emphasis these days, and I don't think it's just an internet thing, though it may have come from the internet, but there's this concept where everyone's searching for their brand. What is your brand? How are you branding yourself? And I think a lot of people are getting a lot of pressure to define what their brand is. And instead of, looking inside themselves to define, they're looking outside themselves to something else. Here's someone who has a brand and I like their brand. So I want their brand to be my brand. And so I'm going to claim that brand, but giving yourself a name and doing superficial things to kind of fit that brand is not your brand. That is a mistaken idea of that concept. Now, I view that concept as pernicious and a plague on society to begin with. But if you're going to engage with it, then finding your brand is all about introspection. It's about, what do you really like? Is there a way you can encapsulate that into a way that you can express to somebody outside of your, outside of your sphere, some unknown person, what your brand is? How can you encapsulate your actual interests in a brand? And that's the direction it needs to go. Not, I like your brand and I want to be that brand.
Right, I want to be that brand.
I'd just like to mention it's currently a total lunar eclipse supermoon at the moment.
Wasn't it also a super wolf blood? They had
Yes,
like a bunch
blood
of
moon.
Blood moon. Yeah. So here's where I wanted to go next, is this idea, this other side thing to the debate of whether goth is this one thing or if it's multifaceted. And we kind of talked about this already, but from my perspective, it seems fairly obvious that from the beginning, goth has been an interaction between community, the creation of art, a curated aesthetic, and music, and that those elements were inextricably bound to one another, enacting what we would call goth. And then in the 90s, it seems like there was this reinvention or re-examination of goth, where you had the creation of a more robust culture. You start to get people talking about goth as a lifestyle full of drama and performative misery, which was that notion of an internalized day-to-day identity that manifests as an external reality. And then that started to merge with the kind of, the fashion, that anachronistic ephemera that was being drawn into fashion from all these different eras, media and music. And it continued to expand and change as time moved on. So that I think that interactivity of those core phenomena bringing together this thing called goth has always seemed most obvious and natural to me. And you don't have to frame it through what I like to do this sort of like ontological becoming and what does that mean? And you can skip all of that philosophy and just go to the sort of affective experiential level, the lived experience of the ritual, the community, the cultural capital that gets exchanged for respect by like time in the scene and specialized knowledge, the act of listening to music and how that makes you feel, and how that helps you embody a goth identity. it just seems really obvious to me that in some form or another, goth is an amalgam. And that these endless debates or these comments about goth is just music, goth is just fashion, goth whatever. It's I think they're all missing the boat, and to some degree.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if it were, it would be fucking boring.
Yeah,
I mean, it would be really boring.
Yeah, it's not a subculture can't be so limited as to be one thing. That one thing could constitute a hobby, could constitute a narrow interest, but doesn't constitute a subculture. It needs to have a little bit more depth than that. And, I would argue, and I know, Daniel, you've argued that, maybe goth is a full-on culture. I think that's taking it too far, but I do think it's rich enough, or it needs to be defined richly enough to at least make a subculture, and actually a fairly well-defined subculture. But it's not just one little thing, because that one little thing does not a subculture make.
Yeah, because if you didn't have other cultural signifiers, like how would you even identify other goths in the wild? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's part of
Radio
it.
tagging.
I mean, you right. I mean, you look at somebody and you could say like, oh, like I might have a lot in common with this person. If I see another person who's a goth, I don't expect that we just have music in common. I expect I expect more from that. I expect that we have similar taste in books and movies and TV shows and maybe even if they're not, on the nose alike, that they're similar enough that I'm now gaining something from this person too. Like maybe this person really likes science fiction more than I do and they're recommending books to me or a movie or something like that I haven't seen. But it's all within the umbrella of goth.
Right,
and that's how we find each other. That's how the culture grows, because it's not just one thing.
Yeah, and knowing that you're in a culture to meet other people like you, and that's the important thing. And if it's just arbitrary interests, you're not going to be able to meet anybody that has your interests shared. You're not going to be able to develop stuff that you actually are passionate about, because you're forcing yourself to associate with people whose interests don't align, and that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
All right, so let's close this out by talking about how the Gothic fits into that equation. So there's a little quote here from Jillian again. She says, "Goth is derived from Gothic, and Gothic is intrinsically about enjoying the uneasy and unsettling beauty of dark and shadowy things. And while the more of those interests you have are probably an indicator of where you fall in terms of gothness, you don't have to have all of those interests to be goth."
So I don't like the Gothic distinction that most people make. I don't really agree with her.
I don't
in
like
that
it either.
It's a pointless debate. I view them as different parts of speech, I guess. Goth is an identity. Goth is something used to, describe your idea, your membership in a community. That's what goth is about. Gothic is an adjective. It describes things. Things are Gothic. Themes are Gothic. Ideas are Gothic, potentially. And goths are often defined by liking Gothic things. But Gothic is a descriptor of a thing, where goth is a descriptor of a community, a person. And that's just how I view the two.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't get the delineation. Like
I just disagree.
Again, it's okay. It's okay to not be a goth.
Right.
Like it's okay. It's
and
fine.
I don't like Gothic as it's used in a way of defining someone who they're not goth enough to be goth, so they're gothic. I find that a little bit reductive, and I don't like that as a term for a person who's into Gothic things, but isn't such to a degree that would allow them to be able to claim the goth label. So I do have an issue with that distinction that's commonly thrown around. I know you like that distinction.
I do, but it's there's basically those two ways of looking at it, and because of just the way that language works, I'm fine with either. It just depends who you're talking to, I think. I
was going to
Go
say
ahead.
the better word for goth adjacent would be gothish or goth-esque rather than gothic.
Dark
Or darkly inclined. That's
inclined.
all fine.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate darkly inclined. Oh god, I don't know why that fucking bugs me so much. But yeah, it does. I don't know. It's like, you know how like women hate the word panties? I hate darkly inclined.
It does feel like a euphemism. It feels like a way of putting something nicely. It's like, I don't want to call you not a goth, but I'm going to be nice and say, oh no, you're just darkly inclined. I think it has value, but it's been used in such a derivative manner that I can understand a knee-jerk reaction against it.
So, I think for me, this presents the same problem that I have with a lot of academic literature that attempts to explain goth culture in terms of the Gothic, capital the Gothic, which I think ends up doing a disservice to both the Gothic and goth, and it just is a flawed way of interpreting the culture to think of goth as a, what did she say, derived from the Gothic. When goth bloomed in the 80s and the 90s, it took inspiration from the Gothic in a lot of ways. There's the spectrality, the uncanny, the romantic, the decadent, and the gaudy. But it also drew inspiration from kabuki theater, German expressionism, absurdist and existentialist philosophies, dandyism, Dadaism, schlocky horror, et cetera, et cetera. So again, it goes back to this blending of phenomena that has always been part and parcel with the community. So to interpret the entirety of goth through a single filter, I think it makes some intuitive sense, but you end up with a skewed, unrealistic view of goth. The Gothic focuses on a lot of areas that aren't related to goth, and the reach of goth extends beyond the scope of the Gothic. So I don't think it bothers me a lot of. So I'm reading this book, Gothic Music by Isabella Van Elfren, and what she kind of tries to do is chop out the sound of goth music or distill it into a feeling or an emotion and try to force that to fit into a Gothic interpretation. She makes this argument that because she says basically because goths describe goth music in terms of affective experience by calling it spooky or dark rather than using musicological terms that describe the sound and the format of goth music, that it is therefore a feeling of the Gothic. And it seems like just such a weak, forced argument to me, because everybody describes music in terms of the way that it makes them feel, and you're sidestepping the importance of the people that make up the goth bands and the distinct history and expression of sound that is just as important as the feeling that music evokes. And then again, the Gothic, it's not exclusive to goths. Gothic has become vogue and is embraced by other media and other people all the time. Like the core of, well, part of the core of the Gothic is this uncanny estrangement from what's perceived as the everyday. And that has made its way into pop culture all the time. American Horror Story, Sabrina, pop artists like Lady Gaga, Poppy is a good recent example. It's on the runway, it's in horror films, it's in sci-fi films. And so it's like the same as saying that goth has an affinity for morbidity, so anything that's morbid is goth. Like, yeah, morbidity is there, but it doesn't explain the entirety of the group or of the individual identity. So, and then another argument I've read to try and shoehorn goth into the Gothic is that goth engenders a feeling of some metaphysical liminality, like it's an uncanny disruption of space and time, which is this experience for some people, like especially in a club setting where you're kind of unmoored from reality, and it's real life is undermined by these uncanny experiences. And like, yeah, again, that's an aspect of that feeling. This embodied otherness is universal to goth, but it's only a part of it. And just because it correlates with the themes of the Gothic doesn't mean that it is a subset of the Gothic. And I feel like this ends up just excising a massive part of what makes goth, which gets back to Gillian Venter's comment that you are, quote, you are in some way goth. And I don't think you can be half goth. Like, you can appreciate and partake in a variety of aspects related to goth culture without liking other aspects, but that doesn't make you the Blade of goth culture. It just means that, you have eclectic tastes.
I was thinking more Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Goth, but Blade would work too.
Right.
There you go.
Or maybe a Victor Victoria thing where you do half white face. That would be a neat aesthetic.
Sure. So yeah, I don't know how often you guys run it. I see it a lot, just specifically because of, we talked about the post-millennial Gothic book. I'm reading the Gothic music book, but there's a lot of academic literature out there trying to force goth into a framework of the Gothic. And I think it totally misses the boat. And then you end up with what the trickle down is. You have just everyday goths saying that, well, goth has been around for thousands of years, and Edgar Allan Poe was a goth, and blah 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 kind of.
So I guess my problem with your contention of the apparent thesis of this Gothic music book, the idea that Gothic music can't be boiled down into these concrete parameters and musicological terms. It's music that evokes these feelings. The problem is those feelings are subjective, and that's probably why we constantly have debates, not just in the what is goth debate, but the what constitutes goth music debate, which is the second most contentious debate out there. And the problem is you have plenty of people that will, they'll be listening to Cannibal Corpse or Marilyn Manson or any band like that and say, well, this makes me feel spooky and alienated, and it gives me these gothic feelings, so it must be goth. And then other people will say, no, it's not. And because it's a subjective definition, there's no winning that argument. There's no answering those questions. What is the through line that merges Dead Can Dance with Alien Sex Fiend, with The Cure, with Bauhaus? What makes these bands all part of this acceptable goth music umbrella? And if it's something as subjective as, well, it just has this sort of spooky, eerie, alienating feeling, that's going to differ from person to person and lead to all of these debates. That's not to say we can readily define things in very strict terms, like the ever thinner slices of electronica music that gets a different label because they add a snare drum here or they use this kind of distortion on the bass line. That's going too far in the other direction, but having some sort of a through line that you can point to could be useful, but maybe impossible.
My bigger problem with the way she phrases that, and again, I'm only halfway through this book, so I think she does actually make a different argument to bring it together that I haven't gotten to yet. That might be interesting, so I don't want to write off the whole book so far. But it's this the adjectival sort of way we understand music. I think that's something that everybody does regardless of genre, because music for a lot of people is about the way it makes you feel, not like you don't hear someone saying, oh, that I love Bon Jovi because of the glissando and the arpeggiated guitar on that one song. It's like, no, it makes me feel happy. It elicits this. And so I think it's
it makes me want to drink domestic beer and shout.
See, I guess the problem is I subscribe to half a dozen music theory YouTube channels, and I have a background in music theory, so I do think of music that way a little bit, but I think of it as a mix. But going pure subjective, it just leads to all these arguments again and again and again, because you can't agree on the subjectivity of things. So if what this book is trying to define is Gothic music, your homology hypothesis doesn't apply because that's about the goth subculture itself. It's not just about this one aspect of it. So the book is focusing on, or at least theoretically focusing on, just this aspect, and attempting, in my mind at least, to try to figure out what this through line is. But like I said, it might be it might be tilting at windmills. It might be an impossible task. There might not be a through line. It's just, it's the stuff that goths gravitated towards. And I'm sure we'll discuss this further in an upcoming episode with a musician.
I guess just to close out on this, as Jillian says, this is going to be an eternal debate. And I think that's healthy. I think this self-conscious dialectical engagement within goth is just as important to shaping who and what we are as the less explicit trends like the changes in fashion and music over time, which help drive us forward collectively as a culture. It's like you said, Trey, it's a living, breathing community, and our views will all change at some point. The four, markers of goth identity, goth culture that I laid out, those have changed since I've iterated on them from Nephilim's video, who iterated on them from something else. So I think the most important thing to remember is that this conversation is going to happen, but let's try and make it a healthy and productive discussion and not divide or dismiss, call people elitists, dismiss legitimate concerns from baby bats, that kind of thing. Let's make it constructive. Let's remember we're in a community and act that way.
Yeah, and that should be everyone's New Year's resolution for 2019. Stop saying elitist and stop saying gatekeeper. Which I don't hate those as much as I hate darkly inclined, but I do kind of hate. I just don't think they have any meaning anymore. They've just been tossed around, so much for somewhat self-serving reasons on the part of some people.
Though
until we get
they are signifiers to a degree of a complaint that one side of that debate has about the other side. The elitist claim comes from someone who is new to the scene, who is being lambasted about doing goth wrong and not really being taught anything, or not, someone who's not trying to educate, but is rather just trying to exclude. And that's where the gatekeeper thing comes from and the elitist thing comes from. And then some of the dismissiveness towards baby bats or just ignorant people who aren't real goths. That's the other direction, where people who are in the community are angry at or lambasting people who are attempting to redefine. So they're signifiers, but they are overused. They're losing that meaning. But to a degree, they are stemming from valid complaints from really both sides of that debate.
Yeah. In general, people need to be more charitable, I think, in their discussions.
Yeah, but you can't, with regard to gatekeeping, I think there's a little bit that has to go on, at least in your club and community environments, because those places are your safe space, and they're the safe space for a lot of people who are maybe not as comfortable with themselves and their identity and whatever you take by identity as an older person is. So you have to gatekeep that a little bit to kind of keep out people who, I don't want to be as dramatic as say like wish harm on you, but that are there disingenuously. So I think a little bit of gatekeeping, if it keeps out the, guys looking for the big titty goth girlfriend thing, then I think that's a good thing. And if you're keeping out, the quote unquote normal people, there's going to be people that type of crowd is going to make uncomfortable. And the goth club is there for us, and it's there to make us comfortable. It's the place we can be our true selves. And for a lot of people, it's the only place.
Album Review.
All right, so let's jump into this album review. I've got a brief description. I basically just pulled this from their Facebook page. So they say, we are a post-punk new wave band in Athens, Greece that formed in 2015. Macrina on vocals, Nikos bass, programmed drums, and synth. Argris guitar, programmed drums, and synths. Later in 2016, our recording engineer, Stavros, was added to play the synth parts live. We performed several gigs in Greece, mainly in underground events. So that's the information I could find. The band is Ghostland, and the album is, Dances on Walls. I'm going to play you guys a track off of the LP, and this one is called Wind of Knives.
So I guess the summation, what I found this band to be an interesting, or a way to define them, was they were an interesting mix of primarily 70s and 80s influence when it comes to instrumental, or at least bassline instrumental, as far as the rhythm section and guitar work. Very much, some of them were more 70s post-punk stuff. Some of them were more early to mid 80s goth rock. Most of the songs, their underlying guitar, bass, drums, instrumentals were very much that, where the vocals and synth textures were very much more of a 90s era dark wave, ethereal wave, cold wave, post shoegaze type of feel. So I found it was an interesting melding of those two genres. The thing that I guess annoyed me right off the bat, though, was that first track. I was really, really, really getting into it. I'm like, oh, this is so cool. It's really getting to do something, and it's looking like it's doing something really interesting, and then it stops after a minute. And then it goes into, track 2 is fine, but it's a very This is one of their very 80s goth rock, very Sisters and Mission influenced song with the very ethereal, heavy reverb 90s goth rock. So it was fine, but it was a little bit of a whiplash feeling going from that first track, which was really getting into sort of a moody, almost cinematic introduction, which ended abruptly, which is another issue I had with the band. A lot of their songs don't really end, they just stop. Not all of them, but a lot of them just, they're like going, and then it's done. So that was some of my critiques. My favorite tracks, my very favorite track was probably track 9, the last track, Against the Light, which was basically they totally let their ethereal wave, shoegaze influences totally take the fore. Drenched in reverb, walls of guitars, a real sort of sludgy, crawling rhythm track, and an interesting use of bass as a pedal point, which I really enjoyed. So that was probably my favorite track. And then the one I hated was Don't Wait, track 4. It had so much promise in the vocals and the ambiance, but the drums and the bass line sounded like bad 80s video game music. And it just kept going through the entire track. And it frustrated me more because I thought it was interesting from a lyrical standpoint, and the singing was interesting, and some of the synth textures on top were interesting. But this drum and bass line was consistent the entire way through the song, and I just couldn't get past it. I just couldn't ignore it or move past it. So that song, every time I listened to the album, and I never skipped it, but I listened several times, and every time I kind of grinned and bared it through that. Yeah. But track 3, The Wind of Knives, that you brought up and played, I thought was a really good track. Very heavy Susie influence, especially in the drums. Might as well have Budgie playing on that album or on that track. I really enjoyed that. Track 5 seemed to have a lot of Joy Division influence, though the vocals reminded me a bit of The Shroud. I don't know if people are familiar with that particular 90s, fairly short-lived band.
Oh my God. My partner said the same thing. He said it's The Shroud, but if that girl could sing.
But yeah, that one, not all of them reminded me of The Shroud, but that one reminded me of The Shroud singing over a Joy Division rhythm track. So I thought that was kind of neat. And The Shroud was one of the bands that I really gravitated to when I was first getting into goth. So they have a special place in my heart.
Yeah, me too.
But
yeah, no shade.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't deal with shame with my musical tastes. I will embrace all my guilty pleasures. And I don't think they get any bad press. I just don't think they're really talked about much because they were a pretty short-lived band. Yeah, so that's pretty much my main statements on it. It's a neat mix of 90s era goth rock with 70s, 80s era goth rock instrumentals.
Yeah, I really liked it. I liked it more the more I listened to it. So I think I listened to it maybe 3 times. I listened to it the day that you sent it, but I listened at work. So I was sort of not really engaged with it, but I noticed that Wind of Knives and The Dancing Crowd were 2 songs that, even though I was working and not, totally focused on it, that made me kind of say, oh, like, definitely have to go back to this. And then when I listened to it at home, I listened to it once by myself, and I listened to it once with my partner, and I was more impressed, listening to it again. And I don't know, did anybody else get 4AD vibes?
Oh, absolutely.
A little bit?
I got 4AD,
Yeah.
Project, Test, Seraph, all of these sort of ambient, ethereal, cold wave, dark wave, 80s to 90s labels. Absolutely.
Yeah, like to me, like I felt especially the vocals, I felt like they were definitely wearing their 90s influences on their sleeve, which I really appreciated. And that's when my partner kind of made the somewhat catty comment about the Shroud, who we both love, but I don't think she was the greatest singer.
That's why you put a lot of reverb on your vocals.
But so there was a very short-lived zine here in the 90s in New York that was one of our local DJs did. And one of the columns, it was kind of like a very taking the piss out of the over seriousness of Gothic magazines in the day, like that had poetry and stuff like that. And one of their features was bands so bad they can't get signed to Cleopatra. and one of them was the Shroud.
Oh wow!
And the other, if I'm remembering correctly, was Lestat.
Ooh.
The irony is, I discovered the Shroud through a Cleopatra comp.
I own their demo tape.
Wow.
Like their cassette. Yeah. Which I think fetches a pretty penny on Discogs if I was willing to part with it, but I'm a little bit of a hoarder, so I won't. But yeah, that was just my side note about the Shroud. But I'd see if I can find that and scan it and send it to you. You'll get a kick out of
hilarious
seeing that. Yeah. But yeah, no, I really like the record. I heard a little. I really am always drawn to vocals like that have a sort of wailing yearning in them, like
it's very
like Exmal Deutschland. Yes, it's very capital G Gothic or capital R romantic. But yeah, like I could almost the record almost gave me a somewhat nostalgic feeling, even though it's brand new. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. And when I saw they were on manic depression, I was like, oh, that's fitting, because manic depression just hits you with good release after good release, I feel. So yeah, I would give it a 4.
Very nice. I feel like this is one of those albums where the band felt like they were required to start off the album with the sort of classic, straightforward post-punk track before getting into what they actually want to do with more varied styles of music, because that's what I got off of the first like proper track on the album. And it seems to be a trend among some of the more experimental bands in the genre, that they have that, oh, here's the straightforward post-punk song, and then now we do the weird stuff. So yeah, there were some tracks that had more of the ethereal Switchblade Symphony type of tracks, and they take that sound and kind of blend it with like some asynchronous, interesting electronic beats. You've got the dancing crowd, which almost sounds like a garage rock song, just that's been updated from the 70s. I think they played more into the ethereal, pushing that into other genres, which was really interesting. It's much more chill and atmospheric than I was expecting based on that first track. But I really was getting into that kind of moody, slow, dark progression, sort of that, Gothic feeling. And this is one of those new bands that's doing something interesting and refreshing with the post-punk genre. And for me, just kind of to give some flavor to where I'm coming from, I was listening to a lot of albums today, but I listened through the I think it was the 2017 album from It's For Us, and I listened to the newest She Passed Away record. And they're really good. They've got great production. They're well put together. They're interesting, but it's straight up post-punk through the entire thing. And while that's great, it's just like I've heard it so many times before. I want to get into the drab majesties of the world, and that kind of do something interesting with the template rather than giving me a polished version of the template. So this was something that was, like you were saying, Michelle, kind of had that nostalgia factor. It was familiar, but different enough to give some some flair and something interesting to the album, and it's something that really kind of does it for me. So we didn't collaborate this, but I also put it at a 4 out of 5.
Wow, consensus.
Wow. As I say, we all agree. This is amazing.
So let's finish off the episode with Sinister Suggestions.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
Well, I don't have anything particularly goth. I have a couple of things that I've gotten into as far as various shows that are enjoyable. So these are my less than sinister suggestions. Couple of really good Amazon shows, since that's the only streaming service I subscribe to. Maybe some people have heard of, especially if you're into sci-fi at all, but The Man in the High Castle.
Yeah, is that good?
So far, it is pretty good. I've read the book. It wasn't my favorite Philip K. Dick book. I like a lot of Philip K. Dick, but I had never really got into that particular story. But it's a real neat alternate history. What if Germany and Japan won World War II and conquered America? What's America like?
Yeah.
And there's, intrigue, and is this the real reality? Is there a parallel reality where America won? What's going on? So that's kind of the underlying theme, the through line for that. So I've been enjoying that. I just started watching that. The other show.
How many episodes in are you?
I've seen the first 3 episodes. So
Okay.
like I said, just started.
I've been considering checking it out, but if you're into it, I think I'll take the leap.
Yeah, I'm definitely into it. And then the other show that I absolutely binge watched and is even less related to Goth, though might get Wraith's interest, is another Amazon show called Mozart in the Jungle, which is sort of a dramatic show about the New York Symphony. And, it's a dramatic fiction about players in the New York Symphony and getting a new conductor and romances and lifestyle of a musician, especially a professional working musician in the city, and perceptions and mixing of the high culture of the people who patronize that sort of thing, and the inability of the actual players to engage in that culture because they don't get paid enough to engage fully in a high class environment. So it's a very interesting show. I quite enjoyed it. And if you have any interest in classical music, it's a good show.
Cool. I just want to comment on the Twin Tribes commentary in the chat. I don't want to take anything away from anybody who's enjoying it. There's, for whatever reason, Twin Tribes kind of came out of nowhere, and everybody's been losing their shit about Twin Tribes. And to me, and I was talking with Melody about this. I listened through, and even we have a technical went on and on and on about how great the album was, and I've listened to it 3 or 4 times. It falls into that. I've heard this a million times before. Like, it's okay, but I don't get why everybody thinks it's so amazing. Like, it's not doing anything for me.
God, I really am influencing you.
I don't know if I'm wrong. I was like, yeah, this is good.
You're wrong, Daniel.
Okay.
You're wrong. No. I mean, sometimes things I forgot what record. It was early last year that everybody was freaking out about, and I was just like, oh God, I don't get it.
Early last year.
Well, I don't get the appeal of She Passed Away personally. I don't like.
Yeah,
them.
that's another one.
So,
that's another one that's
know.
I feel falls in that same line, the same kind of thing as Twin Tribes.
Yeah, when you play She Passed Away and I hear the music, I'm like, this is gonna be amazing. As soon as the vocals start, I start laughing. I'm like, are they taking the piss? Like, what? Like, is this what? Yeah. So I don't know.
It's Elvis.
Yeah, not a fan.
It's Dark Elvis.
Yeah, it's weird. It's over eldritching.
It's kind of a thing, and that's
somebody-
one of my complaints about future pop is they all use a future pop voice, and I like unique singers. Give me my Tom Waits. I don't want another crooner.
Oh, I love Tom Waits.
I'll be into future pop voices until I die, I think.
I know you will.
Anyway, my sinister suggestion is, so I part of sort of going off of my resolution for 2019 about promoting music. I think what I want to do on this section is to promote more music, because there's so much music that's coming out, and there's a lot of really obscure music in from the 80s and the 90s that people don't talk about. And it's so much music that we can't cover it with just one album review every month. So I'm going to be doing music reviews or music suggestions. And the band I'm suggesting this time around is called Witch Hands. They're from Colorado, and they're a death rock band. And the reason I'm suggesting them is because they fall into that interesting category of doing something different. So they have their album is very lo-fi, kind of like death rock punk kind of thing you would expect. So if you're not into like lo-fi production, you won't enjoy it. But what they do with the genre is pretty interesting. They incorporate a lot of weird stuff. Like there's some gothabilly stuff in there. There's some black metal stuff in there. There's some alt rock stuff in there, but all sort of under this umbrella of a death rock type of sound. So that's my suggestion. They're doing something different. They're doing something interesting. And they're one of those like local bands that only people who live in the area know about. So as with everything else, I'll have a link to that in the show notes. So Witch Hands, one word, that is my suggestion. Michelle, what do you got?
Let's see. I have some TV, music, and one book. So for TV, I've been watching Sabrina, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. And my God, it's so cheesy, and I love it so much. I mean, I heard like going into it, I started watching it obviously much later than everybody else, and I heard all this like criticism about its depictions of witches and witchcraft, and oh God, don't take it that seriously. Like, I don't think it's meaning to offend anybody. You know, I think it's clearly something that's making it up as it's going along and not taking itself seriously. But I just think it's great. I think it's styled really well. Like I love the school, and my God, I love those baddie aunties. They're great.
Well,
so cool.
The first two episodes, it is a little weird. The first two episodes feel like they could be a movie. And then they go from that to progressively you get into the more kind of not monster of the week, but the more like serialized kind of silly stuff, which was a little bit of a weird transition. But if you can embrace that, it's a lot of fun.
Actually, if anybody wants to hear one of the showrunners talk about it, which I also recommend. So I have another sinister suggestion, the Witch Wave podcast.
Oh,
and
what is this?
So it's a podcast by Pamela Grossman, who is a practicing witch and New Yorker, and she interviews people of the witchly persuasion. But she interviewed one of the showrunners for Sabrina, and he really, listening to him was kind of what like gave me the like, oh, okay, like people maybe are, I don't want to say overreacting, but maybe people are not, kind of getting what the show is going for. And then when I watched it, I really, really enjoyed it. But yeah, the Witch Wave podcast is also
just subscribe.
Enjoyable. Oh, cool. Let me know how you like it. So then for music, obviously the New Lycia was definitely my favorite record of the year. I guess it was an EP of sort of unfinished work by Them or Us Too.
Yes.
What was that called? Remains. Yeah, that was really great. And I mean, that's just highlights just what a tragedy that loss was in so many ways. But Kennedy from Them or Us Too, their solo album, which was, is it pronounced Surskew?
I think so.
Or SRSQ? Well, Unreality, that was maybe my second favorite record of the year. So I was really dug that. And the new Cellophane, which I think you mentioned that one. And I really like the new record by the Soft Moon. I like the Twin Tribes record. Oh, the new Dead Can Dance. It didn't blow me away.
Yeah.
But I really and this is gonna sound like a dig, but it's not. I really like it as background music.
Sure.
I like the feel of it.
Yeah.
The new album by Marissa Nadler, I think it was called For My Crimes. Yeah, she's on Sacred Bones.
Okay.
And then there was another VV in the Void, which was really good. I think that's from Australia. And that was a very like ethereal kind of dark wave project, also with a female vocal. That was really enjoyable. And then my book recommendation is a great book called The Silent Companions, and the author is Laura Purcell. And it's just, I mean, it's your classic like Victorian ghost story, but it was so well written and really truly creepy, and with one of these like unreliable narrators, and it was great. Highly recommended. That's definitely the best book I read last year.
You're giving me a lot of work for the show notes there, Michelle, but thanks for that.
Sorry.
All right, awesome, man. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always nice to be here.
We will, God's willing, have you on for the return of the Gothquisition at the end of the year, which should be exciting. But
yeah, we'll have all that ire stored up.
Yeah. Leaking out of my butthole at this point.
Thought you had a plug for that.
In about 2 weeks, we're going to be back with a brand new episode featuring Sam Rosenthal of Project Records and Black Tape for a Blue Girl. And now that we're into 2019, there is a lot of really, really good content scheduled to be coming out this year. I'm very excited about where the show is going. If you're new to the podcast and you enjoy what you heard, please consider subscribing, whether you're listening on YouTube or through your podcast app, iTunes, Spotify, whatever it is. I really hope that you stick around and enjoy the content we'll be producing in the future. And for those of you listening close to the date that this went up, we have some shirts available for a limited time, Cemetery Confession shirts. The design that we sold 2 years ago has been put back online and made available again. It's only going to be up for about another week. So follow the link in the show notes if you want to grab one of those. It's on Bonfire, so you can just search Bonfire Cemetery Confessions on Google if you want to do it that way. We've also got a lot of content out on the Patreon page. And of course, Patreon is what allows us to even produce this content in the first place. Everyone over at Patreon who has signed up, whether it's for the extra content or the rewards and things like that, have enabled us to produce these shows twice a month with new guests and make all this content. And really, you are the backbone of this podcast. So I want to take the time to thank each of you, as I do every month. So our supporters for January at the founders level include Taya, Christine, Stella, SJ, Samantha, Esmeralda, and Abigail. Thank you all so much for your support. At the Nocturnal Council level, we have Kyra, Hayshaker, Amy, Dawn, Stevie, Amber, William, Mike, whose music project you can find by searching for Hearts Fail. You can just Google Hearts Fail Band, and it's the first results as their main website. You can check out their music and watch some videos and stuff. Also, Jason, who you can find on Etsy at Junkyard Bat, all one word. He made the patches for the Cemetery Confessions patches back when we did that fundraiser. Thomas, Azzy, DJ Azzy from Florida. If you're in the area, stop by and check her out. Isabel, Natalie, Nephilim and Corruptus from YouTube, Skullgirdle of YouTube as well, Esther, Fifth Dream, Michelle, and Trey. And then at the Crow's Call level, we have Isabel, Robin, whose photography you can find online by searching for Rabin Photography, Rabban, Jen, Alexandra, David, and Dave of Goth Reddit, rather. They also have a Discord. Cadaver Kelly, Chris, Dark Goth Fairy, Jason, Wolfie, Jonathan, King Rhinex, Mark, Ava, Gopal Metro of, Bella Morte and Metro Pirate Radio. He's also got a Patreon you should check out. Andrew, Christopher, Susan, Margarita, Irene, Alana, Mr. Polar Bear, Dagger Dance, Kelly, Abby, Michelle, Alex DeWinter, Jamie, GPS, David, Kimberly, Marissa, Isidoro, Country Fried Goth of YouTube, Stuart, ATAC of, Elitist Joe and DJ ATAC, Christina, Heather, Bronwyn, Morgan, Anne, Sarah, Becca, Beth, Dolly Dagger, Christian, Kelly, Angel, Laurel, Eternal Winter of YouTube as well, Kay, Marco, Dom, Caroline of the Caroline Sometimes blog, Alex Kennedy of I Die You Die, and Joseph. Thank you all so much for your support. As I said, this show exists because of you. If you're interested in supporting the show or want to see what kind of rewards you can get, take a look at patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. Thank you for spending time with us. It really was a pleasure to have you here. I hope you enjoyed the content. I can't wait to continue producing more content for 2019. So until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.